I am unmuted, and now you are unmuted. So, for the six people who are currently here, and also to the people who will be coming in and watching from the beginning, I am joined by a great guest today. Themis from the channel Themis, and say it for me because
Thoth,
yeah, I struggle
Themis
on
and
words.
Thoth.
Yeah, so can you please describe what you do on your channel? The link is in the description if you guys want to go subscribe.
Thank you. So my channel is quite similar to yours. I don't know which subscriber did this, but a subscriber of mine who is also a subscriber of yours connected us. So thank you to whomever did that. But I do similar content to you, right? One of the things that I realized in talking about kind of what is happening in the political atmosphere in the United States is that a lot of people are talking without trying to sort of engage with people who have different political views. There is this idea that when we believe that which we believe, that everyone else is wrong. And I don't have that opinion. And I'm trying to change my mind. So my channel is an attempt not to educate other people, but to educate myself and to really engage with people and learn different perspective. So yeah, that's pretty much what my channel Themis and Thoth is about. It's very political, and I do sort of social commentary.
Yeah, I'm really big into that as well, of course, about the political messaging of it all. I focus a lot on making sure it's not too, I guess, abrasive. I really want to focus on what's going to penetrate as many minds as possible and also equip people. Like when I'm talking to people who agree with me, working on ways that we could get our ideas across that people will be more receptive to in different settings, which is really cool. And you were opening before we actually started the stream on a point about my Charlie Kirk video when he went crazy about Thanksgiving and he said they're
Yeah,
trying to kill Thanksgiving, they're trying to steal it from you.
yeah,
Now they're
yeah.
using the virus to say you shouldn't be thankful. Yeah, so what did he say about that again?
So he said that the left hate Thanksgiving because they think there is nothing you should be thankful for in America. And that I do have sort of a debating background, but that's what it's a logical fallacy, right? It's a straw man. He's not really engaging with the critique of Thanksgiving, right? And so it's a very strange position to be in to watch someone. I was watching you sort of debunk his outrage, which I find very performative, right? I was watching you kind of debunk that, and I was very excited to see people really saying, no, this is not what the issue is. But more than that, when I look to the rebuttal of anything people on the left does. People on the right call them social justice warriors, right? And SJWs, and that's seen as sort of a pejorative term. I don't understand why, right? Social justice warrior. There's no word in the phrase that is supposed to be negative, yet we have accepted that being an SJW is bad. But I think that he completely misses the point of what people are concerned about when it comes to Thanksgiving. I don't know if that's intentional. I venture to believe it is intentional, and he just created a straw man to sort of feed red meat. I think the phraseology is from people in the media to his base. So I really did appreciate you sort of taking that apart.
Well, thank you. And that's what makes the right, it makes the job so much easier for them than it does, for us. Because in order to get our points across, we need to really go into a lot of thinking, a lot of critical thinking, and make a
Yeah,
lot of really clear and concise points based on actual, studies and actual, like I said,
yeah,
critical thought. But they can make stuff up. And this is a characteristic of fascism all throughout history, is literally just making up a bunch of straw men saying, like, oh, the culture's under attack, Western civilization's under attack. It's all the white identity politics, like from Nixon. I think I brought up Nixon in that video. I like to use
yeah.
that as an example because that's really the reaction to the civil rights movement. I see as pretty much the direct path that led us on this in this direction since the 70s, of course.
I
And
mean,
it's so funny, like.
Yeah, I mean, it is. You just pointed to the fact that, right, it's this idea that we have to come with data and we have to come with research and theory. And part of that is so meaningfully exemplified in your video again on Charlie Kirk, because Charlie Kirk and Turning Point USA is on the premise that there is this attack on white male in America, right? And white men need to be protected. Yet there is no sort of research to back that up. In fact, every economic research would indicate the complete opposite of that in the United States. And this kind of disconnect from reality in an effort to put forward a point and seems real to people who are at a disadvantage, right? Like a white man in America who has not succeeding, sorry, can look not just to Charlie Kirk, but they can look to immigrants for they're not making it in America, right? And we'll get into white privilege and what that means and also why I don't think it should be the first thing you throw at a white person when you're trying to talk to them about things, because I think the theory is very different than the cultural understanding of what it is. But we'll get to that when we get to that. So, I mean, I do appreciate sincerely your take on the Charlie Kirk video, because again, I find it highly performative and just unproductive generally.
Well, even right now with all the voter fraud stuff, there's literally no evidence of anything when it comes down to court. In the courtroom, there's nothing at all, and obviously, you would know a lot more about that. But even just like from me, I don't know. I mean, I know nothing about how the legal processes work. But they
Yeah.
literally have nothing. It's all stories. And I saw this one senator who is 100% a straight Trump and fascist sycophant from my state of Pennsylvania. Well, he just got COVID-19 today. He just got tested positive for it while in a meeting with Trump, which I mean isn't the worst thing I heard
I mean, no,
all
I
day.
mean
But
that is literally the I think what is coming to bear now is the fruits that they've planted, right? Like this is part of what Trump has created. Not that he's created the pandemic, but his inability to adequately address it has translated in what we see now. And unfortunately, so many people have died at because of his ineptitude. Now, as it relates to the kind of cases around the election, it's funny because when we were going back and forth on Twitter and we were trying to figure out what we would talk about in terms of could we do the cases and should I go into the legal aspects, I realize there's no legal aspects go into. Right? Every single court that they filed in have pretty much kicked them out because there is a lack of evidence. And I mean, at some point, we should start seeing sanctions for these attorneys that are filing frivolous claims, because with no theory of the case, with no facts to back up what it is that they're trying to purport, with no evidence, with no witness that we can find to be reasonable in any way, it just falls apart. And I think it was in Pennsylvania that the judge that Trump himself appointed kicked them out of the court for a lack of evidence. And I mean, we can argue that it's partisan, we can argue about a lot of things, but I mean, that is his own judge, right? But beyond that, we're talking about states like Georgia, we're talking about states like Arizona, and Pennsylvania is quite literally split between the governor and the legislative branch in the states being two different parties. So for Biden to coordinate with all these groups, I mean, maybe he should be president. I say that jokingly, obviously, but that is, I think that is a feat that does not align with him calling Joe Biden Sleepy Joe. It would be antithetical to literally his own description of Joe Biden for him to mastermind such a plan.
yeah, that's the big characteristic, though, right, of fascism. Like your opponents are both very weak and very strong and very dangerous at the same time, which is exactly what they put forward. But what do you think? Like, do you think there's a long-lasting damage what they're doing right now will show on our democracy, having literally how many million people, like 40 million people who simply will believe any conspiracy theory, which is kind of funny now because we're seeing in the Georgia runoff elections, a lot of Trump supporters are taking to their websites like Parler, and who the ones that are still on Twitter, Trump actually made a tweet directly towards them because they're saying, hey, if the vote's rigged, why are we going to vote in the runoff elections in January? So Trump is saying, no, 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 keep voting. Although voting is rigged, keep voting for this election with Perdue and Ossoff and Warnick and that one crazy lady, Leffler, I think her name is.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's really
Look,
interesting.
I think that. All right. So a couple of things. The first issue, as it relates to the democracy, I think that it is bad. It is really, really bad for the President of the United States holding the office that he does with the power and responsibility that he does to be so uncritical, right, in his approach to what it is that he says and his unwillingness to do a peaceful transfer of power, which he is sort of acquiescing to now, but we'll see how far that goes. So that's one thing. The second element is I find it kind of funny, dishearteningly funny, but funny nonetheless, that he attempts to occupy multiple spaces at once. On one hand, he is this strong, powerful figure, and then on another, he is being attacked and he's a victim. In the same way, the election is rigged and it's a scam, but we should all vote for the candidate that he wants. Similarly, we're talking about Trump saying something to the effect of, hey, there's massive amount of voter fraud. Okay, sure. Do you believe that if there is fraud, it is only happening in favor of Biden? Also, the idea that you already know you win if we discount, quote, voter fraud, for me is not really thoughtful, right? You cannot know that you will win. So I think it would I don't think it would vote better, so I shouldn't say that. But I think it would be better if he just say we should redo the election because we can't tell who win. But that's not what they're doing. They're saying we should redo the election because I win. I won. They don't even say we should redo the election. They're just saying I won. And so there's no credibility there at all, even on its face. Regardless of how he says it, behind it, there would be no credibility because there's no evidence. But just on its face, a statement doesn't make sense if you cannot provide evidence of voter fraud. How then do you know that you won the election? It's frustrating to go through because I don't try to push forward a political ideology. I tell you my thoughts as they come up, but I don't try to tell people how to vote or who to vote for. I really look at sort of inconsistencies in statements that are being made in the political arena. And what I find more often than not is that we care more about the how someone says something as opposed to what exactly that person says and how that would line up logically with previous statements. I don't think Trump fans, if you want to call them that, care so much about what it is that he's saying, what it is that he believes, so much as he is a projection of their own feelings about what America should be. I think that's fundamentally what is happening, which leads into a very, I think, interesting conversation about people who look backwards at America and people who look forward at the promise of what America could be. I mean, that's an interesting conversation.
Yeah, it's really interesting how when you go from left to right on the typical like dichotomy of like the left and right parties, the further left you go, it is really, looking forward, and the further right you go, it does get to a point where they just try to pull it back in history. It's really
Yeah.
interesting how it's so like regressive to progressive. But I didn't see this on your channel from the videos I did watch. Were you somebody that was really, adamant about voting for Biden, or were you somebody who was just saying like, okay, this is what I need to do, this is what needs to be done, we need to do this, and then, then we're done with it?
Okay, so interestingly, I don't know if this is interesting actually. I've never told anyone who to vote for. I have never said I've never told anyone who I was going to vote for. I think it's quite obvious, but I don't really tell people how to vote or for whom to vote. But I do point out a lot of issues with Trump, and I also have issues with Joe Biden, right? Unfortunately, Joe Biden is a candidate we now have. And when I look at him, I don't think he's a good candidate. I know that it has become a trend for us on the left to, quote, drag Joe Biden, but I've been doing this before now. So I don't find him interesting in the sense that I don't think of him as a great president or he was a great VP. I don't think his career, 40 plus years in office, was of great significance in terms of positive outcome for various kinds of people. In fact, the opposite is true. And so I'm highly critical of Joe Biden. But I am even more critical of Trump. And I shouldn't say I'm more critical. I guess, evenly critical of both. I think Trump has more to be critical, right? And so I don't know. I cannot see why people cannot see how bad certain candidates are, and
Mhm.
maybe it's because we've already told they know that if they admit that he's bad, that they have been fooled, right? But that can't be the case because he got more votes this time around than he did in 2016. And that brings into question kind of what we see in America and how the news is being translated to different parts of the world. And maybe there is an elitist approach to politics that does happen in the coastal areas, and we are maybe detached from the rest of the country in a way that Trump was able to exploit. And our unwillingness to reckon with that, disregarding it as racism, might be something that is prohibiting us from sort of like really energizing new areas, new groups of people to get involved in politics. Um, I absolutely adore Bernie Sanders. I do that because he has been the most consistent politician in American history that I can think about. And for someone to stand up for gay rights way back in like the 80s and 90s, for someone to be that thoughtful about the 1994 crime bill, when everyone was rallying behind it, for someone to stick to their guns and be that critical of corporations in the way that Bernie Sanders has been, I think that's quite impressive, right? And so, I mean, I really do genuinely like Bernie Sanders. And we're not even talking about yet his political aspirations, wanting to be president. We're not talking about his policies necessarily. I'm talking about him as a person right now. And then we can get into policies, but I find that kind of meaningless now because he's not even running for president. We've already selected our presidents.
I
So,
kind of want to get into the conversation about communications, which is essentially how should we approach talking to people when it comes to academic terms and when it comes to more contemporary, like more popular terms. For something like white privilege, you brought it up. It might not be the best thing to go to a poor working class white man or woman and say, you are privileged in any way, just because there's a lost translation in there. There's lost meaning in the words. They don't see privilege as a scale of like, you're either, you could be privileged for being white or being rich or being straight or being one of these different things. And when it
yeah.
comes to talking to people who are white working class, I just want to give a little bit of a overview of where I am from. So I live in probably one of the most conservative areas in the United States, in Pennsylvania. When it comes to Pennsylvania, there's Philadelphia, there's Pittsburgh, there's Erie, there's a couple Democratic strongholds throughout the state, but the middle is essentially what they call Pennsyltucky, or, the middle is like Alabama or something like that. Hardcore Rust Belt, it's like West Virginia. Like if you took central Pennsylvania and made it a state, it would be West Virginia, very conservative. So these towns are and this is basically every town in Western New York, West Virginia, Ohio, and PA, some in Wisconsin, the Rust Belt. 99% white, low education. It's an old coal town, steel town, oil town, or simply manufacturing in general. Um, Personally, from my history in central Pennsylvania, there has been a big skinhead movement that has always occupied the town, which is essentially a neo-Nazi group. If no one knows what that is, skinhead is just like the Rust Belt version of the KKK, I guess, like the
Oh, they're
northern
in
version.
Russia too.
Oh yeah, yeah. But all these people were also taught to be scared of outsiders, be scared of immigrants, black people. If they see somebody from Puerto Rico, that, I mean, they're obviously American, but these people from here will say, "There's the immigrant stealing our job." There's no immigrants in Pennsylvania stealing your job. Trust me. Like, people just have to understand that. When it comes to corporations taking our jobs overseas, they don't really know where to direct that anger. People are very
Yeah,
unaware of what's actually happening. I had a voter come up to me and say, these people don't like Donald Trump because he's making them pay their fair share in taxes. Donald Trump pay their fair share in taxes. People don't know this, and I feel like a lot of it's because this area does have lower education. It is mostly white, which leads to being more xenophobic. And I used to think being poor made you more racist, but upon more evaluation, it seems that factors that coincide with being poor, like like a low education, like being in a homogeneous society that isn't diverse or integrated, it seems like that leads you to being racist. It's not like because what do you what do you say about that point? About like being poor and racist.
I don't necessarily believe that being poor makes you more susceptible to being racist.
Hmm.
Um, I think that racism is a disease that affects the victims of racism and also the person perpetrating racism. And I say that because racism requires a power. Let's not be too theoretical, right? Let's just bring it all the way down. Um, Racism does not require something else like low socioeconomic status or anything of the sort. It's just like if on the basic sort of fundamental level, it is about the kinds of uh, superiority complex that a person will have against someone else. I am better than you because of your skin color. That is it. Let's keep it there. I mean, there's more institutional power, but we're not going to get into that. And I think what happens is that we so often point to the poor white person as being racist. And we forget that within the Democratic Party, we have these undertones of racism. Cooper from Central Park was a lifelong Democrat, right? Amy Cooper. Do you remember that case where she was with her dog in Central Park and she called the police saying that a black man was trying to hurt her? Anyway, uh, it was her reverting back to kind of what she understood about the system of racism. I think that we have a very, and not just I'm not saying you, but we all generally have this idea of racism that it's the person who pulls over their head the sheet and put the holes in it and they're marching with the KKK. But I think it goes beyond that to include people who are rich, right? And I don't exclude people who use racism to galvanize poor people. Those people who use it as a tool to galvanize other people are themselves racist too. And so it's very difficult for me to say poor whites are more likely to be racist than rich people. While statistically it is true because there are more poor whites than there are people who have resources, it's not because they're poor that they become racist. I think a lot of factors contribute to racism. And yeah, I mean, sometimes people look for other things to blame when, for white privilege, which I'm going to just kind of pivot into that now. When someone points out that white privilege exists, right? It's very difficult for a poor white person to say, yes, white privilege exists. I am with you, Oprah Winfrey. It's very difficult because you are a rich black person. How dare you tell me that I, as a white person, have privilege? But in the same breath, that white person will yell out with their chest about American privilege, right? Being born in America is a privilege. This is one of the best countries that I've ever lived in my life. And being born here means that you have a sort of privilege. Privilege, theoretically, is an unearned advantage, right? Being American is an unearned advantage right now. That does not mean every American is successful, right? In the same way, being white does not mean having privilege does not connote success. And I think that we have to get away from this myopic view of white privilege. When we say privilege, people automatically go to white privilege, but that's not what we're saying. Well, that's not what I'm saying. Privilege can be that you're beautiful, that you're tall in a world that values taller people. And then in some contexts, being short is a privilege, right? Being, I said beautiful, being born wealthy, being American, like they're being male. And if we accept that we are in a patriarchal society, then being male is a privilege. But if you don't agree to that, then hey, there are other kinds of privilege. Being white does not mean that you have the ultimate privilege. It means that you have a privilege because one of the things I do understand about the US is that we value and we are very hyper focused on race. And we control not just the US media, but the world media. It is why bleaching in certain countries have become a trend, but we're not going to get into that. So I think white privilege is something that makes poor white people feel uncomfortable. It also makes rich white people feel uncomfortable because I think it's usually aimed sort of accusatorily at them and saying you got to your success because of your whiteness. When I
Yeah.
know a lot of white people, most of my friends who I graduated school with are white and they worked really hard to get where they are. And so to point that out, not to them because they've already understood this, but to point this out to certain kinds of people, they are going to say, no, I worked for what I have, and privilege didn't get me there. And at that point, you say, well, no, privilege didn't get you there. You worked hard. Me having a mom with a college education meant that I had a kind of access that other people didn't have in terms of going to college. That helped me, but I also had to run the race. It was made easier for me, but I still had to run the distance. And I think the context is more nuanced, the conversation is more nuanced, and we need to allow for nuance and that breathing space. We cannot beat people over their head and say, you have privilege, therefore, you should help me. That's not how that works. That's not how the conversation should go. That's not how you approach people. And on a human to human level, that's just disingenuous. Like, have a conversation with me. Let's talk about what it is that's happening in the world and let's try to figure it out. But don't accuse someone of having privilege, therefore they're bad. Like, no, we inherited like them on. Unfortunately, some of us inherited the bad part, but we've inherited a system that we ourselves did not create. And so to blame other people for that system who are not actively participating in your oppression, I think is pointless. And I get criticized for not being radical enough. And I think that I don't see a future for the US where we are separated or that we don't help each other. I don't see a future where the African Americans and Black people generally just take over, right? Or white people destroy Black America. I see a future where we are actually working together. I have a dream. I'm kidding. But yeah, I mean, that's how I see it.
I like the American example a lot to describe privilege, because a lot of Americans that don't agree with the concept of white privilege will be drawn to an argument about, patriotism. Being born in America is better than
Yeah,
being born
yeah,
in the lower caste of India, or you would tell them Africa because they're racist, and they'll probably think that's bad or whatever, or somewhere in South America because
yeah,
whatever. That's probably what they think about in their heads when you say a
yeah.
bad part of the world, like Trump said, shithole countries. But we'll get to that later when it comes to that conversation. But I think it's good to meet people where they are in many aspects. And my big
Yeah.
question, um, something that is kind of like my hypothesis for reaching people, do you think it's valuable to reach out first on a class basis and then trying to connect it to a more intersectional approach? Because when I think about the working class right now, there's that big thing on Twitter about like people on the left, when they say working class, they mean white working class in their heads. I completely agree with that 100%. But I feel like bringing working class issues together to the forefront, like Dr. King was doing when he got assassinated, like all the auto workers coming together. I think the first ever a huge like race riot was with white and black workers in New York in the 18. I forget what the exact year was, but it was workers from different backgrounds coming together, different ethnic groups, different races coming together in the same fight. So I'm just wondering, like, will class issues play a role in bringing us together, at least as a starting point?
Yes, I think that is what I'm going to go out on a limb right now and say Republicans have tried to push to the side, right? I think one of the things we can all admit is that with the pandemic as it is now, we've seen some of the flaws in our system. And instead of coming together and trying to figure out how to, I don't know, get everyone health care, what has happened is we've turned it into sort of blame Mexico, right? Blame immigrants. And we pick apart these groups, and it's easier to control people when we silo them off into different pockets, right? As opposed to looking at some of the things that we collectively go through together. One of those things is a pandemic, and I use that because of healthcare and healthcare issues, and the fact that there are people who are going bankrupt in order to have access to medical care. That should not happen in a first world country. And so in posing the question, I keep thinking about sort of I'm not a communist. Let me say that before I move forward. But the Communist Manifesto, right, and the pillars of the Communist Manifesto, right? Actually, let me not use that as an example, because no matter how many disclaimers I use, I will get attacked for being a communist. So let me
Yeah.
leave that alone
I
and
replace
say,
socialist with worker all the time. Socialist with unions. I replace socialist with,
yeah,
collectivism, coming together as a community to solve
yeah.
our problems because, we could do it better than the big companies can. That's what I usually say. I direct it away from those terms as much as
Yeah, yeah,
possible.
no, no. I got attacked for it, so I let me try attempt to rephrase. I'm not very good at this rephrasing. So what's happening is I was gonna use bourgeoisie and proletariat. Why would I do that? Um,
We're on
we
Twitter too
we
much.
yeah, we have two groups of people. And when we find out that the people, the capitalists, let's call them, in charge is literally nickel and diming their workers and really not paying attention to the needs of people who are actually contributing to their wealth, that becomes a problem. And there has to be a point at which we stop looking at these straw mans, to go back to some of the terminologies we used in the beginning, and we start focusing on the real evils, right? Like, I cannot get health care not because an immigrant is in the US. That's not why I don't have access to health care, right? And so I think it requires, like your question was about whether or not social condition and social class is a better way to pull people together in order to aim upwards, right, and fight the real fight. I think so. I mean, I think all the literature around social movements come from the kind of collective consciousness of realizing, right, that something is wrong and we're not doing it to ourselves or to each other, but there are people who own the means of production that are literally killing us, right? When we talk about air pollution, water pollution, all of that, they're literally killing us. But also, we are going to talk about kind of the policies in place that makes it difficult for us to have access to the kinds of resources that we need to have access to. And when we start having these real conversations and not these conversations about immigrants taking our jobs, and you really ask, what jobs? Like, really think about that. Then we start moving in a way that really shakes the system and hopefully becomes transformative. This is my hope. I'm also not for, and I guess this is why I'm not radical enough, right? I'm also not for this idea of just destroy the system. Again, I've lived in many, many countries, and my favorite is the US. And it is because of all the warts that it has. It is an amazing place. It still can do better. And this idea that the right somehow has a monopoly on patriotism does not make sense to me, because wanting the country to do better is beautiful and it is patriotic, right? I talked about the two groups, one looking to the future and one looking backwards. And it's not a negative thing when we say people are looking backwards. What is happening, I think, in conversations with certain people is that they look to the past and they say, look how far we've come. We need to celebrate that. America is doing great. And there are other groups of people who are saying, we need to do more. There's more to go. There's more we need to do. And in so doing, there is this gap where there does not need to be a gap. Yes, America, the US, has done a great job, right? This experiment that is US is, I think, a beautiful, amazing place with all its warts, and it has many. But that means there's a lot more to go. And I don't understand where the disconnect is between these two groups. I mean, one of it might be racism, right? Another might be capitalism. There's many, but I don't know what the fundamental issue is. And I think that's kind of what I want to unravel in order to move forward in again, creating a more perfect union, to use the founding fathers' words.
Well, okay, so we start, and when I say we, I guess I'm referring to the online left, but I guess, okay, progressive politics in general has an issue with getting hung up on the wrong thing. So when it comes to academia versus reality, when it comes to idealism versus pragmatism, and the fundamental use of political power, I think a lot of people on the left don't understand how that works. You need political power and political capital in order to get things done. You need to
Yeah,
know how to control, not control, but gain influence within a population to change things. And when people, voters, can't even gather around an issue that will help them. Universal health care, unionizing, a minimum wage. When you cannot get enough voters to come out for that, you're not going to get voters, I mean, at the very least, to think about communism or socialism or another society past what we currently have, because we have a global order of neoliberalism that's not just going to leave. Like, there's steps to this stuff. If we can't get
yeah,
them to agree with universal health care and universal child care and all those things, we can't get them to agree with reparations. If we can't get if we can't get them to agree with reparations, we can't get them to agree with ending exploitation overseas, at the slavery, the child labor camps that are making the smartphones. And a lot of America's success is because we moved exploitation from here elsewhere. But we need to
yeah,
use the benefits of being in America to educate as many people and solve their material conditions. I think, okay, I don't read theory, but I think Engels said this, that like when everybody's material conditions are met, then they start thinking of a more holistic worldview. They
yeah,
start thinking more artistically, academically. They have time to think about these things. They aren't worried about this oppression because working class people of any color are oppressed. And after you remove that layer, then they start focusing on more. I know there's a lot of people right now who are progressive minded, but when it comes to working within politics, like I was saying, we need to craft these messages to meet the reality. And I feel like a lot of people are stuck in, idealism a little bit.
Yeah, I agree completely with that. But, and however, I think that we do need people who are going to be loud and radical. That's not me, but they are needed in order to push the conversation
I agree.
forward, out of fear that we can become complacent, right? But I completely agree with you in terms of one, convincing people to, I was going to say manipulating, but
Yeah, they're bad
convincing
words.
people, yeah, no, horrible. To convince people to act in their best interest should not be that difficult, right? And I think that the Republican Party has a better understanding of their base than the Democrats do. I say that because it's the messaging out of the Republican Party is very impactful to certain groups of people. Don't understand why. Whereas the messaging out of the Democrat leadership, right, it's very disjointed, and most of us don't agree with it. And the people we decide, and by we I shouldn't be so cavalier in using that phrasing, but we don't generally agree with the people that are being put forward for us to ultimately vote for, and it always ends in, okay, it's the lesser of two evils. Now, what that means, or at least the last two elections, what that means is that there is a disconnect between the base and the politician. Okay, but in terms of talking about theories and how we talk to people, it is important that we're able to meet people where they are. It's something like, I don't know who said this. I heard it was Einstein, but who knows, that a scientist is not a great thinker if they can only speak to other scientists, right? They should be able to go talk to the truck driver or whomever. And I think that's also needed in politics. And we don't see a lot of that. I remember Michelle Obama and Barack, former President Barack Obama, talking about just how people didn't show up to vote and almost blaming people. And I realized in that moment that politicians kind of expect us to just vote for them as opposed to earning votes, right? Like there was this kind of entitlement to voting and to our votes, and I think that was one of the first times that I started thinking critically about kind of how do I show up for and do politics, right? And I don't know. I've read a lot on Obama's sort of years being president, and one of the things that I came away with is that he was really tempered, right? In a way that I found disturbing, in that he had a unified government at one point, right? And so he could have done a lot more. And for me, when I think about that, I understand the backlash, and I understand why it's so trendy to say Obama never did anything for Black people, which doesn't make any sense when he quite literally moved the economy from a recession. But I guess the argument to that is people always say rising tide lifts all boats, and there are holes in some people's boats and all of that. But I don't think the conversation has a lot of nuance in it when we talk about Obama, because he's the first Black president. Let's do identity politics for a minute, right? He's the first Black president. And if you really think about it, like if he had stepped anywhere out of line in terms of overstepping in any way, it would have literally been the red meat for Fox News and Republicans, right? And while I don't agree, I understand. And when I talk about Obama and when I criticize Obama, and I'm very critical, I try very desperately to include nuance in that discussion because it's not enough to say he was just a corporate Democrat, right? Neo corporate liberalism, right? Like throwing those phrases out at him, I agree with them. But why? Right? I mean, he said this in an interview quite earlier today that I watched where he was like, the police acted terribly and he got killed because the political climate during his presidency was not after the death of George Floyd, where everyone, black, white, and everyone agreed that it was bad and people could yell at the police. At the time when he was president, they couldn't do it. Now, again, Bernie Sanders, I'm not going to bring up Bernie Sanders, but I do like Bernie Sanders because he doesn't care. But an Obama has to care. Like he quite literally had to be perfect in the presentation of self. Now, policy not so much, but he was very middle, cut and dry, middle of the road politician. And that's probably what was needed at the time if we were ever going to get another black person. And I mean, identity politics kind of does matter in that sense. I hate it, but it did matter then. I don't know if that makes sense to you.
Yeah, the thing about Obama is I think politics is inherently, I guess, evil in a sense.
Yeah, agreed.
I read his first, I think they're his first two books, Stories from My Father and The Audacity of Hope, I think they were called, if I'm correct. And I saw on your one post you're reading his new book,
Yeah.
so I hope you enjoy that. But I
Oh,
don't
I
think
already disagree with the preface,
here
but
you go. Okay, we can talk about that then if you want. But I think Obama, I don't think he's this evil person. I think, like you said, if you're black in America and you act with your blackness, like I always bring up like Stacey Abrams. She exudes her blackness. Like, Kamala Harris being picked for Joe Biden wasn't by mistake. She
Mhm.
100% was the tested black person or person of color that is digestible for suburban voters. And Biden's entire strategy, and this is in the data as well, is to flip the suburbs or was to flip the suburbs. And that's what won him the entire election. You could see my videos from before the election. I said Nixon had, or not Nixon, but the Republicans had the southern strategy. Biden had the suburban strategy, flipping the suburbs. And that's very intentional. If
Yeah.
Obama didn't govern as a neocon, essentially, like when Obama spoke of systemic racism, I don't know if you saw this, but he spent more time talking about and blaming black fathers than he did about addressing issues of
Yeah.
systemic
Yeah.
violence. And he never talked about being black other than if they brought it up in debates or anything. He really had to hide behind that. And if he didn't act like that, we'd be waiting another generation possibly for a black president. And even
Yeah.
still, that person wasn't going to
Yeah.
be progressive because he couldn't hide behind, being white. He couldn't hide
Yeah.
behind being this acceptable box that all Americans will allow you to exist in. Obama had a lot of things to overcome. In office, I don't know how I feel about presidents in general. They're all pretty bad throughout American history. When it comes to being war hawks, every American president is a war criminal. So what standards are we going to use on that? Like
Yeah.
Kyle Kalinske said, he didn't vote at all because Biden voted for the war in Iraq. Therefore, he should be in jail.
I
But
did not know that.
yeah, he didn't vote at all. That's not. I mean, I wish politics could operate like that. But when it comes down to political power, like right now in the Georgia runoffs, John Ossoff isn't any, he's not a progressive hero, but him getting into the Senate and what's the other guy's name again? Warnick getting into the Senate, but that'll give so much progress to Americans in general that is worth it. Like this isn't just like a light switch you flip on and off. If Bernie
Yeah.
Sanders was president, there's no guarantee anything good other than executive power comes out of it. And
Yeah.
executive orders get
Yeah.
overturned instantly. So like, there is work to be done everywhere and I agree with you. We do need activists on the ground, and they need to keep on going. But we also need people who understand political power, and I think there's a generation of people coming up that do just that.
Yeah. I mean, and there's I think there's need to cancel cancel. There's need to do away with people who aren't like yelling at the top of their lungs about certain issues that you care about. I think is ultimately not productive. It's okay that someone does not want to, quote, defund the police, right? Like, I am for rethinking the way that we do policing in America. And by rethinking, I mean reallocating funds to have mental health professionals be available to help police. But I'm not for completely doing away with the police force. And I had a conversation, and I was arguing with someone, very sort of fiery argument, and they were very adamant about doing away with all policing. And it wasn't until midway through the conversation that I realized that this person agreed with completely eliminating policing in the United States, that I just had to stop, because I thought that was, obviously people believe that, but I thought it was a fringe belief. And he just started showing me, I just said he, I meant she, started showing me videos of people just talking, but thankfully it's still anecdotal. I am not for completely eliminating the police in the United States. I don't think we're in a society that can allow for that. There are women and children who actually do, and men too, who do need the protection of the police. And I don't think all police are bad, right? I do think there are systemic issues in the policing, whether it's racial bias, it is overzealous policing, whatever it is, and I'm sure racial bias is one of those things. We do need to fix it, and we need to figure out how to fix it. And also, cameras on police, great idea. Now, what we do need to do is take it a bit further to make it a burden on the police to prove their innocence in the absence of footage that they should have when they're wearing these body cams. You do not have the right to turn it off and then claim your set of facts without being questioned. And I mean, I just went off on a rant, but that's just an example of something that I'm not as radical on.
So in policing, it's a really interesting conversation, because if you're talking departments in big cities like New York City and like LA, then defund the police makes total sense. But if you talk about a police department in a rural area, or even in a lot of different black communities, defunding the police is the opposite of what needs to be done, because a policing department with strained resources can be worse than a department that has too much. When it comes to resources, a lot of this is in the design of the power structure that we need to fix, and you can do that without a complete, I guess, overhaul of the system, but it's simply too hard to change the system that is unwilling to comply with anything, any type of positive movement. They just simply refuse to do it. Like you were saying, the police body cams, the shooting of, I forget which one it was. There were so many this year that were so public.
Unfortunately.
Oh boy, in Wisconsin, I think one of the shootings there. Wisconsin's terrible for racism, by the way. I read this study a couple years ago about like black people that were looking for a job with clean records got hired at a lower rate than white people that had felonies. So Wisconsin's terrible when it comes to racism. Green Bay, holy crap, that's terrible. But a lot of these police departments were allocated funding for body cams, but there's no accountability, and they never even bought the body cams. So like in some instances we need to defund, some we need to fund more, but things that I like are more transferable, like divest and invest. I think that's a better phraseology than, is phraseology a word? I don't even know. But it is. Okay, just making sure. It seems kind of funny in my head. But then defund the police. Like, your opening argument shouldn't be an attack at the people who you need to help you in order to create change. Like Medicare for all, great. Green New Deal, great. And even like I have a difference in opinion on certain foreign policy issues than some people on the left. But even end the wars, great. But if you say you have white privilege, people just simply aren't gonna get along with you. Like, it's gonna be hard. There's some people who might be allies who are uneducated. Like when I say uneducated, low information is a better term. These people don't know anything about these academic terms you're bringing up. These people are very emotionally driven when it comes to voting and when it comes to where their ideologies reside. Like, I saw so many people being pro BLM after George Floyd, but after propaganda, they were anti BLM again. there's a lot
Yeah.
of people who are right in the middle, ready to go one way or another. But
Yeah.
the right will accept anybody who will help them politically. The right will accept literally anybody. But on the left,
Yeah.
there's 5,000 litmus tests. You need to answer every question correct. And if you don't answer it correct, we're going to judge you and we're going to clamp
Yeah.
down on you. And I
I think
understand
that
it, but
yeah. No, yeah. And I think that ultimately is to the detriment of the left. Um, to You brought up something that I do think we should talk about actually. You talked about the right taking anyone. And it's such an interesting thing to say because there is a premium, I believe, on the right currently for Black voices that will espouse white supremacist ideals. And I think that is so because some of the most prominent people on the left are white, and those white people find it very difficult to address someone like a Candace Owens, right? Because she's going to say, as a Black woman, right? Dot, dot, dot. And I find it so annoying to watch a white. I saw your Officer Tatum video, so I'm very happy you did it because it's so weird for me to see white people being so afraid to debunk a Black person speaking. Like, it is okay if they're factually incorrect to point it out, if we are statistically incorrect to point it out, if we're logically flawed to point it out. And the right again is very good at curating these kinds of people and putting them out as talking heads, much to the dismay of white liberals who are unable to have conversations with them out of fear that they will seem racist in talking to these people. So, I mean, I guess props to you for addressing Officer Tatum. And second, what do you think about that? Do you think these people are genuine, or do you think that they are being placed in positions to speak because of their race? And so playing into identity politics, I think the right does it, the left does it, everyone does it.
I think the most gross use of identity politics is what we're seeing even today. Biden announced an all women communications team, and they're going to cover up a lot of stuff for the Biden administration that is very bad for communities of like color, for instance. He just
Yeah.
nominated, what's her name? What's her name? Nira Tandon or something. Um, yeah, she was really bad on. She had a email that I think Assange leaked, where she said we should make the countries we invaded pay us back in oil for some. I'd have to look deeper into that, but he nominates these terrible people who are gonna hurt people with their policies, but they might be a person of color, they might be a woman. Therefore, if you criticize them, it's misogynistic or it's racist, and they hide behind these terms, and it's really gross to me when they use identity against the same people who hold that identity. So like if they use a person of color, like everyone's talking about the Attorney General of Kentucky, Daniel Cameron. But
Yeah.
a lot of
Oh,
Democratic politicians do what he
ugh.
does without holding the same position and being aggressive, like
Yeah.
he is with it. And I think the people who are open about it, like Daniel Cameron, are much more. I don't want to say respectable, but much different than the people who
Yeah.
are pretending to advocate on behalf of like black issues and using their own identity to I don't know if the
Yeah.
yeah but
Pop themselves up. The funny you should mention Biden, so let's do it. So before Biden hopped into the presidential race, the primaries, which I think he was sort of pushed into because people were aware Bernie Sanders was going to win, but let's not go there. Um, he announced that he would get a woman VP because of the sexual assault allegations that were coming his way. He then decided that he was going to get a black woman when the Kamala called him out for racism, right? Well, she didn't say racism, but when you were opposing busing in terms of integrating schools, you were in favor of segregation, and you can try to talk about sort of federalism and the federal power should be limited, but that's the same argument that we've heard during slavery, during Jim Crow, during the civil rights. Like we've heard all your arguments before about the federalism and what the federal government should and should not do, and that's where it lies. So for me, it was this was another example of using identity politics to shield yourself in a different way, but it also devalued the pick, right? Like you announcing that you wanted a woman only because of the sexual assault allegation, and then you saying that woman would be black when you were called out for being, quote, racist, even though Kamala tried to hide that fact. Those things diminish the person that you then choose. And then it was a whole kind of, I don't know if Americans use hullabaloo, but it was this whole kind of chaos for me, kind of trying to go through that and figure out, well, I mean, Kamala, regardless of what you think about her, at least seems more capable, even though I disagree with her in politics, than all three men. That is Pence, Trump, and Biden. But she being chosen, her being the VP, the running mate for Biden, seemed out of a sense of sort of just her identity. And it felt kind of demeaning to me. Which also brings up the conversation about kind of training and sensitivity training and how to treat Black people and all that stuff. I disagree with how it's done, but I like that it exists. And that's a whole different topic. But yeah, I hope that made sense.
Well, it is how they use it, right? If they use, I'm really critical of simple microaggression diversity training. I
Yeah.
think if you're gonna teach corporate workers for an hour on how to not seem offensive to black people, it would be better served giving an hour long or 2 hour long sociology lesson to give people a more sociological understanding of the conditions and the history behind where black people are in America today. I think microaggressions and stuff lead to what you just brought up. Like, are white people scared to criticize like black conservatives because they feel like they don't have the right to, or even black Democratic politicians? I feel
Yeah.
like the only people who do that are those who are too afraid of sounding racist. I don't know if it's because they are racist or if they say things that they think might sound racist, but I think it all stems from the same issue. It's a lack of substance. It's all flash. We're not getting down to the nitty-gritty of what the reality is on the ground. We're not getting into the reality of what Americans are thinking. We're not getting into the reality of what, led us to this point in history. We're not getting to the reality of policing in America. We're not getting to any of the reality. And I think anything to turn our eyes away from what's actually happening is being counter progress, I guess.
Yeah, no, I mean, I completely agree with you on that. So I ultimately do agree, and I do think that we have to kind of think about sort of how we teach about a group while also maintaining that there is individuality, and you have to treat people as individual while understanding that there are general understanding about sort of the socioeconomic reality of the group, right? Without thinking everyone is exactly the same. And I mean, I do think we can hold both truth, right? Hopefully, we can function as a society without shoving people in a box and being freaked out when people don't fit don't check all those check marks for said box. I mean, I do hope so. That yeah,
Yeah, and I feel like teaching these things kind of might make people more racist in some ways or
yeah,
more
yes,
insensitive because if you are so drawn to microaggressions and you're around a black person and you say, this is a bad example, but if you say, I was with my dad yesterday, oh, wait, I'm sorry. do you not have like, do you know what I mean? If you say something like that, or if you say like, um, whatever stereotype. Oh, I was playing basketball.
Yeah,
I don't mean basketball in that way. I'm not saying I don't. I'm not saying I listen to rap music because you're here.
yeah,
I'm sorry. I don't mean to be offensive to you. I feel like that's a terrible externality of that. So I feel
and
like I said, just teach people, like
yeah,
educate people.
and that's the funny thing. It's like we are human. We mess up. Like people, like you're not gonna be perfect. The one thing we do know is not talking doesn't lead anywhere, right? So engage with people. Try your best. And if you're a good person, if the other person hopefully is also a good person, I understand, for example, that if my friend messes up in some ways that I think is horrible, right? The point of my friendship is so that we can have these conversations about things and we can both learn and grow from it, right? I am not going to disregard someone because they messed up, right? Like they said something that is stereotypical. Their lived experience is very different than mine. And so I am not opposed to educating in the same way that I'm not opposed to being educated, right? And I do think that give and take relationship gets lost when we try to curate everything that we say, make sure that we are pitch perfect. No, just act from a place of love, acceptance, and most importantly, respect. And the people we engage with, we get to learn from and we get to grow with them. The thing about some of the things that happen in even celebrity culture is not that this celebrity or this person did something bad. It's the follow up, right? Like, okay, you did something bad. What are you going to do to address this? Oh, you're going to be quiet. You are going to double down, or you're going to pretend like it didn't happen. That's the problem. Like, you not learning from your mistakes is fundamentally a problem. We are going to make mistakes. We are not perfect. It's what happens. Learn from it, grow from it, and move on. And I mean, fair enough. If the person you're with finds you to be a racist and doesn't want to talk to you because you made a mistake, then that person is a horrible person. Just know that you are approaching life and other people with respect and with an open mind and a willingness to learn. You're not perfect, I'm not perfect, and we're going to make mistakes. It's what happens.
I love these comments. I love when these people hop in. The level of testosterone in the room is at all time. I love those comments. It's
Wait,
funny.
what? Can I, let me
It's a good
read
comment.
some of them? I can't see
The
them.
level of testosterone in this room is at an all-time low. I'm not sure what what a beta male is, but I'm pretty sure I'm witnessing a few.
Oh, by the way,
I love that.
so Jesse Lee Peterson, I did a video
Yeah.
on him, and I fully embrace being a beta male, because this idea that I need to be some sort of hypermasculine person is just not going to work for me, right? Like I've
Same.
been to
Being in a
school, I've
box.
traveled the world, I live a very amazing life, so like I don't as a general matter, I don't need to prove my sort of masculinity to anyone. And I get that a lot, actually. I
Well,
find it
yeah.
quite funny.
Well, it's funny too because I get comments like people saying to me, "Tell me when you see daylight again." And I literally go on 40 and 50-mile bike rides. I go on 10-mile runs. Like I was an athlete all throughout high school. I did force like I don't care about any of that stuff. It's dumb. Like Ben Shapiro. Ben Shapiro's 5'6". He barely has a single speck of hair on his body. He can't grow a beard. He's not a masculine male. He doesn't have those characteristics. He might be in attitude. He might think he's more masculine because feels like he needs to be. But like he was, a really cute theater boy growing up. He tried being a scriptwriter for Hollywood. You know what I mean? Like this guy isn't exactly a lumberjack. And he's telling people like you can't wear a dress because you're destroying masculinity. Like by your standards, your existence is doing that. Like it's okay to be free. It's okay to not be in a box.
I mean, to be fair, also, right? How if masculinity that fragile, right? Like any sort of deviation from these made up rules about what being masculine is becomes an affront to masculinity itself, then that being of masculinity might not be the thing that you want to be if in fact any deviation from it just disrupts it, right? I think that's where the term toxic masculinity came from. To be fair, that was feminist theories who coined that phrase. But I mean, it is a descriptive form of masculinity. So it's not saying every masculinity is toxic, but there are kinds of masculinity performed that could be considered bad, and those are toxic masculinity traits. So, I mean, I love Black feminist thoughts, so I do read a lot of it. So, hey, I no longer want to be considered masculine. I never did, can't ever do it, so don't really care about it. I mean, I do care in the sense of theoretically, I like the idea of these men out in the world trying so desperately to be the macho and the kind of quintessential man that we read in books and movies. I find it quite fascinating. Not me. I am a dandy at heart, and I absolutely love it. Cheers.
Yeah, talk about and these same people will probably say, look at these unrealistic expectations for women, but I mean, men have the same thing. Not the same thing, but you know, they have their own problems with that. Um,
Oh my God. Wait,
yeah,
sorry.
yeah.
This is a random tangent that has nothing to do with politics. I did a video on this guy, let's not say his name, mostly because I can't remember it because I've been drinking too much. And Kevin Samuels, there it is. He actually did a video degrading women, talking about if you pass 35, you're kind of useless. You should not try to date. No one wants you. And I did a video talking about it because he was talking about what it means to be a high value man. And if you look in that comment section, these men are mad. Like, all of them are just obsessed, and like I think it's one of the most viewed videos on my channel, and it's a angry people just like venting about me being a traitor to manhood and me not representing manhood well and giving up because I have a law degree and blah blah blah. And it's funny reading it because all I see are children just having a tantrum in my comment section while still trying to maintain that they are masculine and that they're alpha males and high value men. And I find it to be absolutely absurd. Interesting, but absolutely absurd.
Donald Trump is masculine to people.
Yeah,
Donald Trump is tough to people. He's probably the biggest baby of all
yeah.
time.
I mean, yeah,
Not that that's a non-masculine thing to be. I mean, everyone's a baby if you get down to it. Um,
yeah, yeah. Get
yeah.
in the fetal position and just start cuddling. Like, so.
Um, Before we hop off here, another YouTuber was in chat. He asked a question in my Discord. Um, does your guest think that there will be meaningful progress in race relations under Biden's administration? If yes, why? And if not, why not?
I think yes. And I think yes because Biden, while I don't trust him, I trust that he will do whatever is politically expedient. We are in a climate now that allows for people to talk about race openly and to actually move forward with agendas to help like Black people and people of color. And that did not exist a while ago, right? Like reparation being a part of the agenda and part of like political speech was unheard of, right? And so seeing it now, I think Biden, like Kamala, they both, I believe, just do what is politically expedient. And right now, it is politically expedient to do things that improves the lives of Black people. Prison reform is one thing that I look forward to seeing where they go with it. Donald Trump did the First Step Act, which I praised him for, except they did not put any funding in it. So it actually, anyway, let's not even go there. But that's what I think. I think that I don't give them a lot of credit for anything, but they kind of goes where the wind blows, and the wind is blowing right now in the towards progress. Now, will that wind change? Probably. And will they change with it? Probably. So my opinion might change if things change in terms of the atmosphere, right, the cultural milieu. But I do believe ultimately that they will endeavor to make positive changes to affect minorities.
Yeah, the fact of things being politically expedient is important to understand because politicians aren't really going to do what's right unless if their moral
Yeah,
compasses are
no, no,
so great,
absolutely
like
not.
Bernie Sanders or AOC or somebody like that who really cares about what they're fighting for. They're in politics for the right reasons. If not that, whatever is politically expedient is going to pass. And I feel like it's really masterful, and I hesitate to call it that, but not legalizing marijuana is a really smart thing for Joe Biden to do, not legalizing it. As long as the Democrats can hold power while not endorsing that policy is better
Yeah,
for them because that's such a popular policy. That's like a get out of jail free card for elections, like all throughout the country. If Joe Biden pushed for legalization nationwide, then Democrats it'd be done already. There'd be
yeah,
no more political capital to be gained from pushing that
yeah,
policy forward. So it's so smart for them to not. I mean, it's terrible for people of color, for any person who's smoking, and gets caught in a state that's not it's not legal in yet. But it is a smart thing to hold over people's heads, um, politically. And and obviously, what is good politically is almost never good for people. It needs to be a set list of conditions. But yeah, how long are we going? Let's see. How do I see this? 1 hour and 24 minutes. All right, so for the 19 people still watching, make sure you check out. Well, you could just say your channel again and everything.
Themis and Thoth, you guys can come on over there. I post every Tuesday and Thursday, and I go live on Fridays. That will change because my office is spread up work, but yeah, that's generally what I do, and we talk politics and culture.
And what degree are you going for right now? Or are you out of school or
I am out of school.
you're out
I'm
of
at a
school?
firm working as an attorney.
Okay, when did
This is
you graduate in law?
2019, and then
2019. Okay.
worked in a court, and then I worked in a court as like a law clerk for a judge, and then I went to a firm.
All right, yeah, that's
I'm a
awesome.
sellout.
The link is in the description to the Themis and channel, the TNT channel.
Just Themis.
All right, everybody,
Those is very difficult.
everybody
Thank
have
you
a good
guys
night.
so much for having me. I really do appreciate it. And yeah, hopefully we do this on my channel. I would love to talk to you. This has been very informative. I actually really do like talking. So
Oh yeah, me too. This was great. Just this week I have finals and everything, so I'm gonna be pretty booked. The only way I'm gonna stream this week is if something interesting comes out. Like usually a channel releases good content, like PragerU or Ben
yeah,
Shapiro or somebody. If they release content that's good, I'll probably stream to watch it. But this week I'm gonna be pretty. Other than what you said Friday, possibly.
yeah. Well, probably we can. I mean, you have finals. I'm not in a
Oh
rush
no,
to.
Friday's fine. That'll be I'll be done by then. That'll be weekend. So.
But also, before we go, what do you think about Biden being president and that in terms of content for you?
In terms of content, I think it's pretty relieving when it comes to real politics. I think Donald Trump was really good for content for people who are already really big, like people who were able to become rich off of politics, like the big streamers like Vosh and Hassan and all those people. Trump is great for them, but when it comes to real politics, I think it's time for organizers to stand up at the bottom, and I think that's what I'm going to be really concerned with doing.
Yeah,
A lot of this is a fun little. Yeah, a lot of it is hobbyism, what people do online. But Donald Trump being in office was really a stunt of progress, not only because he was so bad, but also because all attention was paid to him. I think progress is gained, and this was my logic for voting Biden. I think progress is gained during liberalism, pointing out the flaws of the current system and fixing them. Donald Trump took all attention away from the flaws of the current system and took all attention towards him. And
yeah,
that's
yeah,
terrible. But right now, we have a chance to, what I always say, break down the reality TV show and bring it back to the reality that
yeah,
Americans are facing. And that's what we need to keep on doing. Just make everything like we were talking about. Like I talked to Socialism Done Left last week. He is a socialist, but the way he talks and operates in politics is very similar to our conversation today, making sure the ideas can sell, making sure the ideas work, and all of that. And it's really, just constant progress. This is the important part. The presidential election, I don't care. That's over. Now here comes the important part. The 4 years in between the
yeah.
elections is what's important. And by the way, Just one last thing about Ice Cube. I hate when celebrities like him do what he does, which is come up every 4 years around a presidential election and say, "All right, time to get involved in politics. Everybody, both sides are corrupt," and as if we haven't been fighting that fight for the past 4 years.
Oh, I did a whole video on him. Actually, two. One where I defended his right to be in there and our right to ignore him. And then I went back because he lied about whether or not the Biden campaign would meet with him before the election. And yeah, that was not pretty. So I did videos on him. But yeah, completely agree with you on that.
Yeah, all right. So I will message you about another day, and
All
everybody have a
right.
great night. Who's still here? All right.
Have a good
Bye
one.
now. Um,